You show up. Every single day, you show up. You read the personal finance books. You listen to the podcasts on your commute. You built the budget spreadsheet. You track every dollar. You stress over every subscription. You're doing everything they told you to do. And somehow, the person who has never opened a finance app in their life, the one who doesn't know what an expense ratio is, the one who couldn't tell you their credit score within 50 points, is quietly building more wealth than you. Not only are they not struggling, they're ahead. They own a house. They have investments growing in accounts they haven't logged into in 2 years. They sleep without the financial anxiety that keeps you awake recalculating your emergency fund at 1 in the morning. And you're sitting there wondering how that is even possible. You're doing everything right. So why does it feel like the financially disciplined person always loses? My name is Begin Success. And today we are breaking down the 4 reasons why financially lazy people consistently outperform people who obsess over their finances, and what that gap reveals about the entire way most of us were taught to think about money. Because here's what I want you to understand before we go any further. This isn't a video about laziness being a virtue. This is a video about a specific set of behaviors that financially lazy people accidentally get right. Behaviors that anxious, over-optimizing money managers accidentally destroy. The system punishes the wrong people. And once you see exactly why it happens, you'll never look at your own financial habits the same way again. And if this is your first time here, welcome to Begin Success, where we break down the money systems, career traps, and wealth patterns that nobody teaches you in school. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is exactly the kind of content we put out every week. Now let's get into it. Let me tell you about a guy I'll call Derek. Derek worked at a mid-sized marketing firm. He came in around 9:15 most mornings, never late enough to be written up, never early enough to be noticed. He took his full lunch hour, left at 5:01, and in 4 years, nobody could point to a single project Derek had personally driven from start to finish. His desk was clean because he didn't produce enough work to make it messy. Meanwhile, 2 seats down sat a woman named Priya. Priya arrived at 8 a.m. She stayed until 6:30, sometimes 7. She covered for Derek when he disappeared during crunch periods. She answered emails on weekends. She trained 2 new hires that Derek was originally assigned to mentor because Derek had a lot on his plate. She built the department's entire client reporting system from scratch. In 3 years, Priya had quietly become the structural backbone of that team. Derek still has his job. He got a 3% raise last review cycle. Priya, burnout, under-recognized, and exhausted, left for a competitor. And the moment she walked out, the team collapsed for 2 months trying to replace what she had built. Here is the part that should make your blood pressure rise slightly. When Priya left, the manager's first call was not to promote someone. It was to figure out how to redistribute her responsibilities across the remaining team, including Derek, without hiring anyone new. Derek absorbed exactly one of her tasks. He did it adequately. Nobody panicked about Derek's workload. Nobody ever panics about Derek's workload. Because Derek had done something, whether he knew it or not, that Priya never did. He had made himself just present enough to avoid consequences, just visible enough to avoid suspicion, and just agreeable enough that nobody wanted the headache of replacing him. He was not a problem. And in most organizations, not being a problem is more than enough. Priya, on the other hand, had made herself indispensable, which sounds like a compliment until you realize it meant nobody could afford to promote her either, because there was nobody ready to step into the role she had quietly absorbed. She was too valuable to move up and too exhausted to stay. Derek is still there. That story is not an accident. It is not bad luck. It is a pattern, and it repeats itself in offices, departments, and organizations all over the world. And there are 4 specific reasons why. So let's get into the first reason. And this one is going to reframe everything you thought you knew about how job security actually works. Financially lazy people, the directs of the world, have an almost obsessive understanding of the minimum performance threshold. That is the exact line between consequence and fine. And here is what makes this so uncomfortable to admit. Most high performers have never once thought about where that line actually is. Think about what Priya knew about her job's actual requirements. She knew the work inside and out. She knew the clients, the systems, the deadlines. But did she know the precise point at which her performance would trigger a formal warning? Did she know exactly how many dropped tasks, missed deadlines, or below-average reviews it would take before HR got involved? Almost certainly not. Because people like Priya are never anywhere near that line. They never needed to find it. Derek found it. Deliberately or not. Derek mapped the exact boundary between employable and at risk, and he parked himself just on the safe side of it. He knew which meetings actually required preparation and which ones just required a pulse. He knew which deadlines were real and which ones had a 48-hour invisible buffer that nobody admitted existed. He knew which tasks his manager actually tracked versus which ones disappeared into the void of a shared drive nobody opened. This is the calculation that high performers never run, because they are too busy performing. Research on workplace behavior consistently shows that employees who are terminated are almost never let go for doing the minimum. They are let go for falling below the minimum, for attitude problems, for conflict, or for financial restructuring. Doing the minimum consistently with reasonable pleasantness is one of the most stable positions in any organization. It just doesn't feel that way from the outside. Here's the brutal math of it. If the threshold for consequence is a 5 out of 10, Derek operates at a 6. Priya operates at a 9.5. From a job security standpoint, both of them are safe. But Priya is spending nearly double the energy to achieve the same outcome, continued employment. And the energy Priya burns getting from 6 to 9.5, Derek redirects that into rest, into side income, into investments he actually has time to think about, into a life that exists outside of the office. That's not laziness. That's resource allocation. And it leads us directly to reason number 2. And it gets worse. Or better, depending on which side of this you're on. Because it's not just that financially lazy people conserve energy. It's what they do with the energy they conserve. And this is where the wealth gap between Derek and Priya stops being about personality and starts being about strategy. Here is what Derek does with the bandwidth Priya burns on output. He invests it in perception, not in doing more, in being seen doing the right things at the right moments. And there is a significant financial difference between those two approaches that most hard workers never stop long enough to notice. Derek has an unspoken rule that high performers almost never discover because they're too heads down to observe it. I call it the 1 time out of 10 rule. 9 times out of 10, Derek is doing the minimum, answering emails adequately, attending meetings without contributing much, delivering work that is acceptable but not remarkable. But that 1 time out of 10, that one moment, Derek shows up completely. He volunteers for the high visibility project right before the annual review cycle. He stays late the 1 week the regional director is visiting. He sends a thoughtful, well-timed message to leadership that lands at exactly the right moment. And here is the thing about human memory and perception in organizational settings. People do not remember averages. They remember peaks. One genuinely impressive moment inside a sea of adequate performance registers in a manager's memory far more than 50 consistently excellent weeks that blurred together. Priya delivers at a 9.5 every single week. Her excellence becomes the expectation. It stops being noticed because it never stops. Derek delivers at a 6 most weeks and a 9 once a quarter. That quarterly 9 is what gets remembered in the review conversation. This is not cynical. This is behavioral psychology operating inside every organization on the planet. And while Priya is spending her evenings recovering from a 10-hour day, Derek is spending his evenings doing something else entirely. Reading, building a side income, maxing out his retirement contributions because he actually has the mental space to think about them. Researching an investment he's been watching for 3 months. having the kind of unhurried relationship with his finances that chronically overworked people simply never have time for. The wealth gap between the overperformer and the strategic minimalist is not built in the office. It is built in the hours after 5 p.m. that one person has and the other person doesn't. And that leads us directly to reason number 3. And it gets even hotter from here. Okay, this is the one that is going to make you put your phone down for a second, because reasons 1 and 2 were uncomfortable. But reason 3 is the one that explains why the system doesn't just tolerate people like Derek, it actually protects them. And once you see the mechanics of how this works, you will never look at a workplace dynamic the same way again. Financially lazy people have, again, whether consciously or not, positioned themselves inside what I think of as an accountability shield. And it operates on a beautifully simple principle. If you are never clearly responsible for anything, you can never be clearly blamed for anything. Watch how Derek moves through a project. He is agreeable in the planning meeting. He nods. He contributes 1 or 2 reasonable suggestions. He volunteers for the parts of the project that are unlikely to go wrong and unlikely to be scrutinized. The high-stakes deliverables, the client-facing components, the pieces with real consequences attached, those naturally gravitate toward Priya because Priya is capable and Priya says yes. When the project succeeds, Derek was part of the team. When the project struggles, Derek was not the one responsible for the components that failed. He is somehow always adjacent to the outcome, but never anchored to it. Now here is where it gets particularly maddening. Management does not read this as avoidance. Management reads this as knowing how to leverage the team. Derek is collaborative. Derek understands his role. Derek doesn't step on toes. These are things that get said in performance reviews about people who have architected a near-perfect system for receiving credit without absorbing risk. Research on career advancement consistently shows that perceived leadership potential is more strongly correlated with visibility and likability than with measurable output. Derek is visible at the right moments and likable at all moments. That combination reads as leadership material to many managers, even when the output doesn't justify the label. Meanwhile, Priya owns everything. Her name is on the deliverables. Her signature is on the client emails. When something goes wrong anywhere near her domain, the accountability lands on her because she made herself the obvious owner of everything she touched. She built an empire of responsibility with no corresponding empire of protection. Derek built a wall of strategic ambiguity that deflects consequence in every direction except toward himself. And the person who never absorbs consequence at work has something extraordinarily valuable outside of work: stability, consistent income, no performance improvement plans, no stress eating the budget during uncertain months. Which brings us to reason number 4. And this one lives at the top of the organization. Here is the final reason. And this one requires you to stop thinking like an employee for a moment and start thinking like a manager. Because everything we have covered so far, the minimum threshold, the visibility strategy, the accountability shield, all of it only works because of one simple, unglamorous truth about how decisions get made at the top of any organization. Managers do not spend their time thinking about Derek. That is it. That is the entire reason. Derek is not a fire, and managers spend their time putting out fires. Think about what lands on a manager's desk on any given week. A client escalation that needs handling, a team conflict that needs mediating, a deadline that is about to be missed, a performance issue that HR needs to be looped in on, a budget conversation that needs preparation, a hire that needs to be made. Their attention is a scarce resource, and it flows entirely toward problems. Derek is not a problem. Derek shows up. Derek is pleasant. Derek completes his tasks at an acceptable level. Nobody is calling the manager about Derek. Nobody is emailing HR about Derek. No client has ever complained about Derek. In a landscape of genuine fires, Derek is a patch of ground that is simply not on fire. And the manager's instinct, the completely rational, understandable human instinct, is to leave that patch of ground alone. Now here is where it gets particularly interesting. Who is generating the fires that consume the manager's attention? Often, without meaning to, it is the highest performers. Priya's ambitious project overran its timeline. Priya's direct communication with a client created an expectation the team couldn't meet. Priya pushed back on a process in a way that created friction with another department. None of these things are character flaws. They are the natural byproduct of someone operating at full capacity and full ownership. But from a manager's desk, they register as problems that require attention. So the manager spends their week managing Priya and ignoring Derek. And at the end of the quarter, when it is time to make staffing decisions, Derek has generated 0 negative signals, 0 friction, 0 escalations. The path of least resistance, the path that every cognitive bias in the human brain gravitates toward, is to leave Derek exactly where he is. And the path of least resistance always wins inside organizations that are not actively fighting against it. Derek's job is safer than Priya's. His income is more stable. His stress is lower. And his wealth, quietly, is growing faster. Which leads us to something even darker. Because Derek didn't invent this system, he inherited it. Here is the part nobody wants to say out loud. Derek did not design this system. He did not sit down one evening and architect a master plan for strategic underperformance. He did not read a book about visibility tactics and accountability shields. In most cases, people like Derek are not even fully conscious of what they are doing. They simply followed a pattern that was already working because they learned it from the people above them. Look at who gets promoted into management in most organizations. It is rarely the Priyas. The Priyas burn out, leave for competitors, go independent, or get quietly passed over because they are too operationally critical to move. The people who get promoted are frequently the people who were excellent at being liked, excellent at being visible at the right moments, and excellent at avoiding the kind of direct ownership that creates political exposure. In other words, a significant number of managers got to where they are by doing a version of exactly what Derek is doing. And here is what that means for the culture of the organization. When Derek's manager looks at Derek, there is a recognition happening that has nothing to do with performance metrics. The manager sees someone who understands how the game is actually played. Someone who is not going to create unnecessary drama. Someone who is, in a very real sense, operating from the same instincts that got the manager to where they are. I have seen this dynamic play out dozens of times. The manager does not protect Derek because they are corrupt or incompetent. They protect Derek because Derek feels familiar. Derek feels safe. Derek feels like someone who understands the unwritten rules, because those unwritten rules were written by people exactly like the manager decades ago and passed down invisibly ever since. Meanwhile, Priya feels like a variable. High output, yes, but also high friction, high ownership, high visibility, which means high exposure when things go wrong. From the manager's perspective, Priya requires active management. Derek requires almost none. And in an environment where the manager's own job security depends on their team not generating problems, the person who generates no problems is quietly, structurally protected. This is not a conspiracy. It is something far more insidious than a conspiracy. It is a system that perpetuates itself automatically, without anyone needing to intend it, because the incentives at every level quietly reward the behavior that built the system in the first place. The Priyas keep the organization running. The directs keep inheriting it. And that means the burden of this entire dynamic lands on exactly one person. You. So let's talk about what you actually do with all of this. Because I want to be clear about something before we close. This video is not an instruction manual for becoming Derek. Derek's approach has a ceiling. Strategic minimalism without skill development is just slow career decay with better stress levels. The goal is not to copy Derek. The goal is to stop being unconsciously exploited by a system you never knew existed. Derek's financial laziness is not your boss's problem. It is your problem. You are the one absorbing his workload. You are the one making his continued employment invisible and consequence-free. You are the safety net that the entire system is resting on. And the system will never volunteer that information to you, because the moment you understand it, the dynamic changes. So here is what changes when you understand it. First, audit your ownership footprint. Make a list of every responsibility you currently carry that was never formally assigned to you. Everything you absorbed because nobody else would. Everything you picked up because the alternative was watching it fail. Everything that lives in your head and nowhere else. That list is your leverage map. And your first move is to make that invisible labor visible to your manager, in writing, in your next review conversation. You cannot be compensated for work that leadership does not know you are doing. Second, implement a strategic visibility practice. Before your next review cycle, identify 2 or 3 high visibility moments where your contribution will be seen directly by decision makers. Not just your immediate manager, the people above them. Presence at the right moment, with the right people in the room, does more for your career trajectory and your salary negotiation than 6 months of excellent invisible output. Start engineering those moments deliberately instead of hoping excellence gets noticed on its own. Third, protect your hours after 5 p.m. like they are a financial asset, because they are. Every hour you spend recovering from a day of overperformance is an hour you are not building anything of your own. A side income, an investment portfolio, a skill that the market will pay you for independently. The wealth gap between the overperformer and the strategic minimalist is not built inside the office. It is built in the hours that one person guards and the other person surrenders. The playing field was never level. But now you can see exactly where the slope is. You can see who benefits from your effort, how the system is designed to keep that arrangement invisible, and precisely what it is costing you in income, energy, and wealth every single year. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.